Montana Territory, 1873. The early spring sky unleashed its fury as Jacob Armstrong stared at the letter in his trembling hands. 3 weeks. His mail-order bride wasn't due for another 3 weeks, yet the station master had just informed him she was arriving tomorrow on the afternoon train. His stomach knotted as he glanced around his homestead, the unfinished addition to the cabin, the untamed garden plot, the sorry state of his bachelor existence. "What kind of man ain't ready for his own wife?" he muttered, crumpling the telegram's edge. The wind howled in response, rattling the cabin windows as if mocking his predicament. He had exactly 24 hours to transform 6 years of solitary living into a home worthy of the woman who'd agreed to marry him sight unseen. A woman named Delilah Rose, who according to her letters was sensible, hardworking, and not opposed to frontier living. Not exactly romantic poetry, but Jacob hadn't been looking for poetry. He needed a partner, someone to help shoulder the burden of his growing ranch and fill the crushing silence of Montana nights. What he hadn't needed was for her to arrive early, before he'd managed to build something impressive enough to make her want to stay. Perfect timing, he said bitterly, reaching for his coat. Asterisk, 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 the train whistle pierced the crisp Montana air as Delilah Rose clutched her carpetbag and peered through the soot-streaked window. Ridgewater Station looked nothing like the bustling Chicago platform she'd left behind, just a wooden building, a water tower, and a handful of horses hitched to posts. "Last call for Ridgewater," the conductor announced, startling her from her thoughts. Delilah smoothed her best traveling dress, navy wool that had seen better days but was still respectable, and touched the cameo at her throat, her mother's parting gift. What would her mother think of her now, stepping off a train to meet the stranger she'd agreed to marry? The platform was mostly empty except for a tall man in a worn duster. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, clutching his hat in his hands. His face was partially obscured by a beard that looked freshly trimmed, though not by a professional hand. When his eyes met hers, he straightened like a soldier called to attention. "Miss Rose?" he asked, his voice lower than she'd imagined from his letters. "Mr. Armstrong?" Her own voice came out steadier than she felt. He nodded, extending a calloused hand before awkwardly withdrawing it and jamming it into his pocket. "Jacob, I wasn't expecting you so soon. The orphanage needed my room," she explained, the weight of all she'd left behind suddenly heavy in her chest. "They had a new girl coming in. I wrote about the change, but I suppose the letter didn't arrive ahead of me." His expression shifted, and she couldn't tell if it was relief or concern. "I got your telegram yesterday. Not much warning. I'm sorry if it's inconvenient," she said, the doubt that had plagued her entire journey surging anew. Perhaps this had been a mistake. Perhaps he was regretting his offer already. "No, not inconvenient," he said quickly. "Just unprepared." An uncomfortable silence stretched between them as the train huffed and puffed behind her, preparing to continue its journey westward. A flurry of questions raced through Delilah's mind. Was he disappointed in her appearance? Was he reconsidering their arrangement? Should she have stayed in Chicago, enduring Miss Holloway's orphanage until her 25th birthday, rather than gambling on this wild territory? Jacob cleared his throat. "I've got the wagon just over there. Unless you need something in town first." Delilah glanced at the dusty main street with its handful of establishments. "No, I'm ready to see where I'll be living. If possible." Jacob looked even more uncomfortable at that. About that. But whatever he meant to say was interrupted by a commotion down the street, shouting men and the sound of breaking glass. "Trouble at Sawyer's again," Jacob muttered. "We should go before it spills out. Town's not usually like this, I promise." As he guided her toward a sturdy wagon, Delilah caught sight of a man being thrown through the saloon's swinging doors, landing hard in the dirt street. The violence was shocking after the controlled environment of the orphanage. What kind of place had she come to? And more importantly, what kind of man had she agreed to marry? She climbed onto the wagon seat, careful to keep a proper distance from Jacob as he took the reins. As they pulled away from town, she wondered what awaited her at the end of this journey, and whether she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. Asterisk, 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 the first few miles passed in awkward silence. Jacob kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, acutely aware of the woman beside him. She sat primly, her back straight as a fence post, hands folded in her lap. Nothing like the local women who'd grown used to the casual ways of frontier life. This woman carried herself like she belonged in a drawing room, not a ranch wagon. It's about 10 miles to the ranch, he finally said, if only to break the quiet. We should be there before dusk. You have a large property? She asked. 200 acres. Not the biggest spread, but it's good land. Creek running through it, plenty of grass for the cattle. He was babbling now, nervous as a schoolboy. Started with just 40 acres and 15 head. Been building it up these 6 years. She nodded politely. Your letters mentioned expansion plans. Yes, ma'am. Just finished the new barn last fall. Been working on adding another room to the cabin, but... He trailed off, not wanting to admit it wasn't complete. But, she prompted. Jacob sighed. But it's not finished yet. I was counting on those 3 weeks to get it done before you arrived. There. He'd said it. Now she'd know what she was walking into. An unfinished home. A husband-to-be who couldn't even properly prepare for her arrival. To his surprise, Delilah's expression softened slightly. Mr. Armstrong, Jacob, I may have been raised in an orphanage, but I'm no stranger to work. I didn't come west expecting a mansion. Still, a woman deserves better than what I've got ready. She studied him then, really looked at him, and Jacob felt the weight of her assessment. Perhaps we should be honest with each other from the start, she said. I came west because I had few options. The orphanage where I was raised and later worked keeps girls until they're 18, then finds them positions as maids or shop girls. I stayed on as a teacher, but they can't keep staff past 25, and that birthday is approaching faster than I'd like. Jacob nodded, surprised by her frankness. Your advertisement said you wanted a practical woman who understood hard work and wouldn't mind isolation. I believe I meet those requirements. What I need to know is whether you're an honest man who will treat me with respect. The rest, the house, the land, that's all secondary. Her directness caught him off guard. The women he knew, the few respectable ones in the territory, couched everything in pleasantries and indirection. I am honest, he said finally, and I'll respect you as my wife. Then I suggest we proceed as planned, unfinished room or not. Relief washed through him. Thank you, Miss Rose. Delilah, please. If we're to be married, we should use our given names. Delilah, he repeated, the name feeling foreign on his tongue. He clicked to the horses, urging them a bit faster as the sky began to darken with approaching clouds. Looks like we're in for some weather. Better get you home before it hits. Home. Such a simple word, but one that made Delilah's heart clench. She hadn't had a real home since she was 6 years old. Would this remote Montana ranch ever feel like one? And this quiet, serious man beside her, could he ever feel like family? As the first raindrops began to fall, Jacob urged the horses to a trot, and they raced the storm toward the uncertain future that awaited them both. Asterisk, 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 the cabin came into view just as the skies opened. Rain poured down in sheets, soaking them both as Jacob helped Delilah down from the wagon. They ran for the porch, her carpet bag clutched tightly against her chest. Not the welcome I planned, Jacob said, fumbling with the door latch. Inside, the cabin was dim but warm, the embers of a morning fire still glowing in the stone fireplace. Delilah stood dripping on the plank floor, taking in her new surroundings. The main room was tidy but Spartan, a table with 4 chairs, a cook stove, some shelves with provisions, and a sitting area near the fireplace with a rocking chair and small sofa covered in a faded quilt. 2 doors led off from the main room. That's the bedroom, Jacob said, pointing to one door. And that's the storeroom that I've been converting for you. Until after the wedding, of course. Delilah nodded, understanding his meaning. They wouldn't share quarters until properly married. When is the minister expected? Jacob ran a hand through his damp hair. That's another complication. Reverend Tilson only comes through every 2 months. He's due in 3 weeks. I see. Delilah set her bag down, unsure what to do next. So we're to live as what? Exactly, until then. Neighbors, I suppose, Jacob said awkwardly. I can sleep in the barn if that would make you more comfortable. Nonsense. This is your home. She looked toward the storeroom door. May I see my quarters? Jacob hesitated, then moved to open the door. It's not finished, he warned again. The room beyond was small but clean. A narrow bed frame stood against one wall, though it held only a straw mattress with no proper bedding. A chest for clothes sat at its foot, and a small table served as a nightstand. The window was covered with a piece of oilcloth rather than proper curtains, and the walls were bare wood, not yet chinked against drafts. I plan to finish it this week, Jacob explained. Get some proper bedding from town, put up curtains, maybe even get some wallpaper for one wall at least. Delilah stepped inside, running her hand along the wooden bed frame. It was solid and well-crafted, if simple. You made this? Jacob nodded. Last winter. It's beautiful work. He seemed surprised by the compliment. Thank you. I've got quilts and pillows in my room we can use to make it up properly. That would be fine, she said, then glanced out the window at the pouring rain. Though it seems we're trapped inside for now. An awkward silence fell between them. They were strangers expected to build a life together, yet they could barely manage a conversation. You must be hungry after your journey, Jacob finally said. Let me fix something to eat. Delilah followed him back to the main room. I can help. I'm a fair cook. No, you're my guest tonight. Tomorrow you'll be mistress of the house. But tonight, let me serve you. He moved to the stove, stirring the embers and adding wood from a box nearby. As Jacob busied himself with preparations, Delilah took the opportunity to examine the cabin more closely. On the mantel sat a daguerreotype of a family, a stern-looking man, a woman with kind eyes, and two boys of different ages. She picked it up carefully. My parents, Jacob said, noticing her interest. And my brother James and me. That was taken just before we left Pennsylvania. Where is your family now? Jacob's movements stilled for a moment. Gone. Father took fever our first winter here. Mother followed him the next spring. James joined the Union Army in '62. Didn't come back. The simple, unadorned grief in his voice touched something in Delilah. I'm sorry. I know what it's like to be alone. Is that why you answered my advertisement? Jacob asked, his back still to her as he worked at the stove. To escape being alone? Delilah considered the question. Partly, but also for a chance at something I couldn't have in Chicago, a home of my own, perhaps children someday. A purpose beyond teaching other people's children until I'm too old to be useful. Jacob turned to look at her then, his expression thoughtful. I can't promise much, but I can offer those things. This land can be your home too. And I'd welcome children, God willing. The open acknowledgement of what their marriage would entail brought heat to Delilah's cheeks, but she met his gaze steadily. Then perhaps our arrangement will suit us both. Something shifted between them in that moment. Not quite comfort, but a tentative understanding. They might have begun as strangers making a practical arrangement, but there was potential for more. As Jacob returned to preparing their meal, Delilah wondered what other surprises awaited her in this new life. The man before her was different from what she'd expected, gentler, more thoughtful than his letters had suggested. What else would she discover about Jacob Armstrong? And what would he learn about her? Outside, thunder rumbled across the Montana sky, while inside, two strangers began the delicate dance of building a shared future. The storm showed no signs of abating as evening settled over the cabin. Jacob served a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple preserves. To Delilah's surprise, it was quite good. You're an accomplished cook, she said, accepting a second helping of cornbread. Jacob's ears reddened slightly at the compliment. Necessity teaches a man many things. Though I admit I'm looking forward to having someone else take over the kitchen duties. I hope I won't disappoint. The orphanage kitchen was quite different from this. I'm not hard to please, he assured her. Just grateful not to eat my own cooking every day. A comfortable silence fell as they finished their meal. Outside, the rain continued its steady drumming on the roof. Would you tell me about your ranch? Delilah asked as Jacob cleared the plates. Your letters mentioned cattle, but not much else. Jacob seemed to relax a bit, on familiar ground at last. Started with just 15 head, like I said. Now we're up to nearly 100. Mostly Herefords, good stock. Got 8 horses, 4 workhorses, my riding horse Thunder, and 3 Mares for breeding. Chickens, of course, and 2 milk cows. Me and Hector Morales. He helps with the ranch work. Lives in a small cabin down by the creek. Good man. Fought in the war, same as my brother, but on the other side. Doesn't hold it against me, though. Delilah nodded, filing away this information. And your nearest neighbors? Caldwell Place is about 3 miles east. They've got 5 children, oldest about 12. Mrs. Caldwell will be glad to have another woman nearby. Then there's Old Man Sutton to the north, and the Andersons west of us. Town's 10 miles south, as you saw. It seems quite isolated. Jacob studied her face. Does that worry you? No, she said truthfully. The orphanage was crowded. Too many people, too little space. I think I'll appreciate the quiet. There's plenty of that, Jacob agreed, a small smile touching his lips. Almost too much sometimes. Delilah helped him finish clearing the table, then they settled near the fire. Jacob in his rocking chair, Delilah on the small sofa. The domesticity of the scene struck her, how quickly they'd fallen into this routine, as if they'd known each other for years instead of hours. May I ask you something? Jacob said suddenly. Of course. Your letters never mentioned. That is, you didn't write about why you were in an orphanage. Delilah stiffened slightly. It wasn't a topic she discussed often. My mother died when I was 6. Consumption. My father was already gone, left for the California gold fields when I was 4 and never returned. No other family to take me in. I'm sorry, Jacob said quietly. It was a long time ago. Still, no child should grow up without family. The sincerity in his voice touched her. The orphanage wasn't so bad. Strict, but fair. I received an education, learned practical skills. Miss Holloway, the headmistress, was kind in her way. Is that why you stayed on as a teacher? Delilah nodded. I was good with the younger children, and I had nowhere else to go. Until now, Jacob said softly. Until now, she agreed, meeting his gaze across the firelit room. The intensity of his eyes made her look away first. This man was still a stranger, yet in a matter of days, he would be her husband. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through her stomach. I should prepare your room, Jacob said, rising from his chair. It's getting late. Delilah followed him to his bedroom, standing awkwardly in the doorway as he gathered bedding from his own bed, a quilt, sheets, and a pillow. His room was as simple as the rest of the house, though she noticed a small bookshelf beside the bed, filled with well-worn volumes. You're a reader, she observed. Jacob glanced at the shelf. Winter nights are long here. Books help pass the time. What do you enjoy reading? He shrugged, almost embarrassed. History mostly. Some poetry. Whatever the mail brings. Another surprise. This quiet rancher with his practical letters and calloused hands read poetry in the solitude of Montana winters. Delilah found herself increasingly curious about the layers beneath Jacob Armstrong's reserved exterior. Together, they made up the narrow bed in what would be her room. When finished, Jacob lit a lamp and placed it on the small table. It's not much, he said, looking around the sparse room. It's more than I had at the orphanage, she assured him. My own room is a luxury. Jacob nodded, then moved toward the door. I'll leave you to rest. We can talk more in the morning about arrangements. Thank you for your hospitality, Jacob. He paused in the doorway, his tall frame nearly filling it. I'm glad you came, Delilah, even if it was early. With that, he closed the door softly behind him, leaving Delilah alone with her thoughts. She sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the rain and the occasional crack of the fire through the wall. Tomorrow they would need to discuss the practical matters of their situation, living arrangements until the minister arrived, expectations, boundaries. But tonight, in this small room that would be hers, Delilah allowed herself to acknowledge the flicker of hope that had sparked inside her. Perhaps this hasty arrangement, this marriage of convenience, could become something more. Perhaps Jacob Armstrong, with his gentle hands and hidden depths, could become not just her husband, but her companion. As she changed into her nightgown and slipped beneath the quilt, Delilah whispered a prayer of thanks for safe travels and a cautious prayer for what lay ahead. Outside, the storm began to ease, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the clearing sky. Morning arrived with brilliant sunshine that transformed the muddy landscape into a glistening panorama. Delilah woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of movement in the main room. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then yesterday's events came rushing back. The train, the rain-soaked journey, the quiet dinner with the man who would soon be her husband. She dressed quickly in a practical brown skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her hair into a simple knot at the nape of her neck. When she emerged from her room, Jacob was at the stove, his back to her. Good morning, she said. He turned, a coffee pot in his hand. Morning. Sleep well. Very well, thank you. The bed was comfortable. Jacob nodded, seeming pleased. Coffee's ready. I've got eggs and bacon too, if you're hungry. That sounds wonderful. Delilah moved to help him, but he waved her away. Please sit. I've been feeding myself for years. One more day won't hurt. As they ate breakfast, Jacob outlined his plans for the day. I need to check the north pasture, make sure none of the cattle got out during the storm. Then I'll head into town for supplies. Thought you might want to come along, see a bit more of the area in daylight. I'd like that, Delilah said. But first, I'd like to discuss our situation. Jacob set down his coffee cup, his expression serious. Of course. The minister won't arrive for 3 weeks, she began. In the meantime, we'll be living here, unmarried. I'm concerned about propriety. As am I, Jacob assured her. I meant what I said about sleeping in the barn if needed. That seems extreme, especially with the spring nights still so cold. Delilah chose her next words carefully. I trust you, Jacob. You've been nothing but gentlemanly. I believe we can maintain proper boundaries while sharing this house until the wedding. Relief washed over his features. I appreciate your trust. I promise it won't be misplaced. Good. Then that's settled. She took a sip of her coffee, then continued. There's also the matter of our wedding. Will it be just us and the minister? The Caldwells will likely want to attend. Mrs. Caldwell has been after me to find a wife since I arrived. She'll consider your presence a personal victory. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. The Andersons too, probably. And Hector, of course. I'd like to meet them all beforehand, if possible. We can ride over to the Caldwell place tomorrow. Sarah Caldwell will be beside herself with excitement. Delilah nodded, satisfied with the plan. And what about today? Besides the trip to town? I thought I'd show you around the ranch first, if the ground's not too muddy. Then we can head to town for supplies. I want to get proper curtains for your room and whatever else you might need. That sounds perfect. After breakfast, Jacob gave her a tour of the cabin and the immediate surroundings. In daylight, she could better appreciate the setting. The cabin sat on a gentle rise, overlooking a valley where cattle grazed in lush meadows. A creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods and willows just beginning to bud. Behind the cabin stood a large barn, a chicken coop, and a sturdy corral where several horses watched their approach with interest. This is Thunder, Jacob said, as a striking black gelding trotted to the fence. Best cow horse in the territory. The horse nuzzled Jacob's outstretched hand, clearly devoted to his master. Delilah reached out hesitantly to stroke the animal's neck. He's beautiful. Do you ride? Jacob asked. A little. There wasn't much opportunity in Chicago. We'll find you a gentle mare. Can't get around these parts without a good horse. As they continued the tour, Delilah began to see the ranch through different eyes. What had seemed isolated and primitive yesterday now revealed itself as carefully planned and well-maintained. Jacob might not have the refinements of city living, but he was clearly a capable steward of this land. They were heading toward a distant pasture when a rider appeared, coming fast from the direction of the creek. Jacob tensed slightly beside her. That's Hector, he said. Something's wrong. He wouldn't ride like that otherwise. They waited as the rider approached, a lean man with a weathered face and dark mustache. He reined in his horse sharply as he reached them. Jacob, he said, nodding briefly to Delilah before continuing. We've got trouble. Found 3 dead calves by the North Creek. Mountain lion, from the looks of it. Jacob's expression hardened. Where's the rest of the herd? Moved them to the east pasture. But that cat's still out there. Fresh tracks this morning. Jacob turned to Delilah. I'm sorry, but I need to handle this. Mountain lions can devastate a herd if not dealt with quickly. Of course, she said. Do what you need to do. This is Hector Morales, Jacob added belatedly. Hector, this is Miss Delilah Rose. My bride-to-be. Hector's eyebrows rose slightly, but he touched the brim of his hat respectfully. Ma'am, welcome to Rockingham. Sorry about the circumstances. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Morales. Please don't worry about me. I understand ranch emergencies must take precedence. Jacob hesitated. Our trip to town will have to wait. I'm not comfortable leaving you alone here, but I need to track that cat before it kills again. I can stay with the lady, Hector offered. Show her around while you handle the cat. Jacob shook his head. I need you with me. 2 guns are better than 1 with a mountain lion. I'll be fine here, Delilah assured them. I can unpack and perhaps start on dinner for when you return. Jacob still looked uncertain. The cabin's safe enough, but don't wander too far. There's a rifle above the door if you need it. I'm sure that won't be necessary, she said, though the mention of the rifle reminded her of the very real dangers of frontier life. We'll be back before sundown, Jacob promised. Stay inside if you can. With that, the two men mounted their horses and rode off toward the northern pasture, leaving Delilah standing alone in the yard. She watched until they disappeared over a distant rise, then turned back toward the cabin. So much for their day together. But this was the reality of ranch life. Unpredictable, sometimes dangerous, always at the mercy of nature's whims. As she walked back to the cabin, Delilah couldn't help but wonder if she was truly prepared for this life. In Chicago, danger meant pickpockets or unscrupulous men. Here, it meant mountain lions that killed calves and who knew what else lurking in the surrounding wilderness. Yet there was something exhilarating about it too. The vastness of the land, the self-reliance required, the partnership she and Jacob would build against these challenges. For the first time in her life, Delilah felt truly needed, not just convenient or useful, but essential to the success of this endeavor. With renewed purpose, she entered the cabin to begin making it her home, trying not to think about the two men hunting a predator, or the rifle hanging above the door, or how quickly her safe, predictable life had transformed into this wild, uncertain adventure. Jacob and Hector followed the mountain lion's tracks for miles, deep into the forested hills north of the ranch. The cat was clever, doubling back and crossing streams to confuse its pursuers. By mid-afternoon, they had yet to corner it. "We're losing light," Hector observed as the sun dipped toward the western mountains. "And she's been alone all day." Jacob knew Hector meant Delilah. Concern had been gnawing at him since they'd left her. "You're right. We can pick up the trail tomorrow." As they rode back toward the ranch, Hector cleared his throat. "So, mail-order bride, eh? Didn't know you were looking." "Wasn't your business," Jacob said, but without rancor. After 6 years working side by side, he and Hector had developed a friendship that transcended their employer-employee relationship. "She seems nice. Pretty too." Jacob nodded. "She arrived early. Wasn't expecting her for another 3 weeks." Hector chuckled. "That explains why you've been working so hard on that room. And why you look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm not ready, Hector. The house isn't ready. I'm not sure I'm cut out to be anybody's husband." "Nobody's ever ready," Hector said philosophically. "My Maria and I, we knew each other 6 days before we married. Sometimes you just jump and hope for a soft landing." Jacob considered this. He'd known Delilah less than 24 hours, yet already he felt a connection to her, her directness, her quiet strength, the way she'd accepted the primitive conditions without complaint. "The Reverend won't be here for 3 weeks, he said. "Gives us time to get to know each other a bit." "Or time to get cold feet," Hector observed. Jacob frowned at the thought. Would Delilah change her mind once she truly understood what life here would be like? The isolation, the hard work, the constant struggle against nature's challenges? She might be better off going back to Chicago, he admitted. "What can I offer her here except hard work and worry?" Hector gave him a knowing look. "A home of her own. Children someday. A husband who respects her. Those aren't small things, amigo." They were the exact things Delilah had mentioned wanting. Still, doubt plagued Jacob as they crested the final hill and the ranch came into view below. Smoke rose from the cabin chimney, a welcoming sight in the gathering dusk. "Looks like your bride is settling in," Hector remarked. "Better not keep her waiting." They parted ways at the creek, Hector heading for his cabin while Jacob continued to the main house. As he approached, the scent of cooking food reached him, something rich and savory that made his stomach growl in response. He stabled Thunder, taking extra time to brush the horse down and gather his thoughts. What kind of welcome awaited him inside? Would Delilah be resentful of being left alone all day? Would she be frightened by the talk of mountain lions? Would she already be regretting her decision to come west? Only one way to find out. Jacob squared his shoulders and headed for the cabin door. The scene that greeted him inside was so unexpected that he stopped short just inside the threshold. The cabin had been transformed. The plank floor gleamed, freshly scrubbed. The windows sparkled. The mismatched dishes that had accumulated over years of bachelor living were arranged neatly on the shelves. And at the stove stood Delilah, her sleeves rolled up, her hair coming loose from its pins, stirring something that smelled like heaven itself. She turned at his entrance, a flush on her cheeks from the heat of the stove. "You're back. I was beginning to worry." "That cat led us on quite a chase," Jacob said, hanging his hat on the peg by the door. His eyes continued to take in the changes to his home. "You've been busy." Delilah wiped her hands on her apron. Where had she found an apron? I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make myself useful. Mind? No, I. He gestured helplessly at the transformed space. It's never looked this good. Not even when my mother was alive. She smiled then, a genuine smile that reached her eyes and transformed her face. I'm glad you approve. Dinner's nearly ready. I found a stew recipe in a book on your shelf. I hope you like it. I'm sure I will. Jacob moved to the wash basin she'd set out, grateful to wash away the dirt of the day's tracking. Did you manage all right on your own? Very well. I unpacked my things, explored the garden area. It needs work, but the soil seems good, and then decided to make myself at home here. She hesitated. If I've overstepped? No, he said quickly. This is your home now too. Or it will be, once we're properly married. The reminder of their situation brought a slight awkwardness back between them. Jacob dried his hands and moved to the table, which had been set with care using his mismatched tableware. Did you find the mountain lion? Delilah asked as she served the stew. Not yet. We'll try again tomorrow. He tasted the stew and couldn't hold back an appreciative sound. This is delicious. Thank you. The orphanage taught me to make the most of simple ingredients. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Jacob spoke again. I'm sorry about our trip to town. We'll go tomorrow if the cat doesn't cause more trouble. There's no rush. I've plenty to keep me occupied here. Jacob studied her across the table. You're taking all this in stride. The isolation, the primitive conditions, even a mountain lion threat on your first full day. Delilah set down her spoon. Would hysterics help the situation? No, but they wouldn't be unexpected. Most city women would find this life challenging. I'm not most women, she said simply. And I knew what I was agreeing to when I answered your advertisement. You were honest about the conditions here. Jacob nodded slowly. Still, knowing about something and experiencing it are different things. True, but I'm adaptable and determined. She met his gaze steadily. Unless you're having second thoughts about our arrangement? The directness of her question caught him off guard. No, not at all. In fact, I'm more certain than ever that you're exactly what this place needs. What I need, he almost said, but stopped himself. It was too soon for such admissions, even in his own mind. Delilah seemed satisfied with his answer. Good. Then we're in agreement. As they finished their meal, Jacob found himself studying her when she wasn't looking. The graceful movements of her hands, the determination in her profile, the way she'd already begun to transform his bachelor existence into something resembling a home. Maybe Hector was right. Sometimes you just had to jump and hope for a soft landing. And Jacob was increasingly hopeful that with Delilah Rose, the landing might be softer than he deserved. The next morning brought clear skies and a fresh determination to deal with the mountain lion problem. Jacob left at dawn with Hector, promising to return by midday to take Delilah to town. Be careful, she said as he mounted Thunder, surprising them both with the genuine concern in her voice. Always am, he replied with a small smile that warmed something inside her. Alone again, Delilah set about continuing her domestic transformation of the cabin. She tackled Jacob's bedroom next, not entering fully, but reaching in to gather the dirty laundry scattered about. The domestic intimacy of handling his clothes made her cheeks warm, but she reminded herself that soon she would be his wife, responsible for such tasks. Wife. The word still felt foreign, almost make-believe. In 3 weeks, she would stand before a minister and bind herself to this quiet, serious man whose home she was cleaning. Not for the first time, Delilah wondered if she'd been hasty in accepting Jacob's proposal. Yet what were her alternatives? Returning to Chicago and the orphanage? Finding a position as a shopgirl or maid? Living in someone else's home on someone else's terms? No, she decided as she filled a washtub with water from the pump outside. This was her best option, perhaps her only option, for the life she wanted. And Jacob, for all his roughness and reserve, seemed to be a good man. Respectful, hardworking, honest. Many women married with far less promising foundations. She was up to her elbows in soapy water when a voice called out from the yard. Hello? Anyone home? Startled, Delilah dried her hands quickly and hurried to the door. A woman stood in the yard, a basket over one arm, curiosity evident on her friendly face. Hello, Delilah said, stepping onto the porch. Can I help you? The woman's eyes widened with obvious surprise. You must be Jacob's bride. We had no idea you'd arrived already. Delilah stepped forward, extending her hand. Delilah Rose. And you are? Sarah Caldwell, your nearest neighbor. The woman clasped Delilah's hand warmly. My husband Thomas and I have the place 3 miles east. I was just bringing Jacob some fresh bread and eggs, never expecting to find you here. I arrived earlier than planned, Delilah explained. Please, won't you come in? Sarah followed her inside, still chattering excitedly. Jacob never said a word about you coming so soon. That man, always so closed-mouthed about everything. I've been telling him for years he needs a wife. And here you are? From back east, I imagine. Chicago, Delilah confirmed, taking the basket Sarah offered. Thank you for these. It's very kind. Nonsense. Neighbors look out for each other out here. Sarah was already examining the cabin, noting the changes Delilah had made. My, you've certainly made an improvement already. This place has been a bachelor hovel for too long. Delilah smiled, warming to the friendly woman. Would you like some coffee? Jacob's out tracking a mountain lion with Mr. Morales, but he should be back by midday. Coffee would be lovely. Sarah settled at the table, removing her bonnet. Now tell me everything. How did you and Jacob meet? When's the wedding? What do you think of Montana so far? As Delilah prepared coffee and answered Sarah's questions, she found herself genuinely enjoying the female companionship. It had been a long time since she'd had a conversation with someone who wasn't an orphan or a stern headmistress. So the minister won't be here for 3 weeks? Sarah confirmed, shaking her head. And Jacob's keeping you here, unmarried. Until then? That won't do at all. We're being very proper, Delilah assured her. Jacob offered to sleep in the barn. Sarah waved this away. Nonsense. You'll come stay with us until the wedding. Thomas won't hear of anything else, and we've plenty of room with the girls sharing already. That's very kind, but really not necessary. Jacob and I have an understanding. I'm sure you do, dear, but it's not about that. It's about your reputation. Montana territory may be frontier, but people still talk. A new woman staying unchaperoned with a bachelor? Tongues will wag. Delilah hadn't considered this angle. In Chicago, propriety ruled every interaction between men and women. Why had she assumed the rules would be different here? I wouldn't want to impose, she said hesitantly. It's no imposition. I'd welcome the company, truly. And you can get to know the children. They're wild as rabbits, but good-hearted. Sarah leaned forward conspiratorially. Besides, it'll do Jacob good to have to come courting properly. The thought of Jacob courting her brought a smile to Delilah's face. They'd skipped that step entirely in their practical arrangement. I'll discuss it with Jacob when he returns, she promised. Sarah nodded, satisfied. Now, tell me more about yourself. Jacob's letters never mentioned how pretty you are. Delilah blushed at the compliment. His letters to me were equally sparse on personal details. I knew his ranch size and cattle count before I knew his age or appearance. Sarah laughed. That sounds like Jacob, man of few words, but the ones he does say, you can trust. Thomas says he's the most honest man in the territory. That's reassuring to hear. He's had it rough, losing his family so young, building this place on his own. Sarah's tone grew more serious. He deserves some happiness. I hope you'll bring that to him. The responsibility implicit in Sarah's words settled heavily on Delilah's shoulders. She hadn't thought of her role in those terms, bringing happiness to Jacob. Their arrangement had been practical, mutual benefit rather than emotional fulfillment. Yet wasn't that what a real marriage should include? Before she could respond, the sound of hoofbeats announced riders approaching. Jacob and Hector appeared in the yard, dismounting with the weariness of men who'd been in the saddle since dawn. Looks like the men are back, Sarah observed. And successful, from the looks of it. Delilah followed her gaze and noticed then what was draped over Hector's saddle, the tawny body of a large mountain lion, limp in death. Jacob entered first, stopping short when he saw Sarah at his table. Mrs. Caldwell. Didn't expect visitors today. Clearly not, since you didn't bother to tell me your bride had arrived. Sarah rose, hands on hips in mock indignation. I had to find out by stumbling upon her doing your laundry. Jacob's eyes found Delilah's, a question in them. She gave a small shrug in response. It all happened rather suddenly, he explained to Sarah. Delilah arrived early. So I gathered. And now you two are living here, unchaperoned, with the Reverend weeks away. Sarah shook her head disapprovingly. Jacob's expression darkened. We're not. I've invited Delilah to stay with us until the wedding, Sarah interrupted. and I won't take no for an answer. Jacob looked to Delilah again, his brow furrowed. Is that what you want? Delilah hesitated. Mrs. Caldwell makes a good point about propriety. I hadn't considered how our arrangement might appear to others. I don't give a damn what others think, Jacob said bluntly, then winced. Pardon my language, ladies. It's not about what you care about, Jacob Armstrong, Sarah scolded. It's about Delilah's reputation. Do you want your future wife tarnished by gossip before she's even properly settled here? Jacob ran a hand through his hair, leaving it standing on end. No, of course not. Then it's settled. Delilah will come home with me today, and you can visit proper-like until the wedding. Sarah's tone brooked no argument. Now, I hear you got that mountain lion. Good riddance to the beast. As Sarah bustled outside to examine the cat and congratulate Hector, Jacob moved closer to Delilah. You don't have to go with her if you don't want to, he said quietly. Perhaps it would be for the best, Delilah replied. Mrs. Caldwell is right about appearances. Jacob nodded slowly. I was getting used to having you here. The simple admission warmed her. It's only for 3 weeks, and we'll still see each other. Under Sarah Caldwell's watchful eye, Jacob said with a rueful smile. That woman could make a preacher nervous. Delilah laughed, the tension easing between them. She seems kind, though, and it will be good for me to know another woman in the area. True enough. Jacob glanced around the cabin, noting all she'd accomplished in his absence. I'll miss your cooking, though, and whatever magic you've worked on this place. I'll still come by to help with the house, she promised. We need to finish preparing it for after the wedding. The reminder of what would follow their marriage ceremony hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but impossible to ignore. After 3 weeks of proper courting under Sarah's supervision, they would return here as husband and wife, sharing not just a home but a bed. The thought sent a flutter of nervousness through Delilah's stomach. She barely knew this man who would become her husband in every sense. Yet there was something about Jacob, his quiet steadiness, the gentleness that belied his rugged exterior, that calmed her fears even as it awakened other, less familiar feelings. I should pack my things, she said, breaking the increasingly charged silence between them. Jacob nodded. I'll help you with your bag. As they moved toward her room, Delilah couldn't help but wonder what the next 3 weeks would bring, and whether living apart might draw them closer together or reveal incompatibilities that would doom their hastily arranged marriage before it even began. The Caldwell household was exactly as Sarah had described it, chaotic, noisy, and overflowing with life. 5 children ranging from 12 years to 18 months swarmed around Delilah upon her arrival, curious about the new addition to their home. Thomas Caldwell, a broad-shouldered man with kind eyes, welcomed her warmly. Any bride of Jacob's is family to us, he declared, carrying her carpet bag to the small bedroom she would share with the 2 eldest Caldwell girls. The contrast between the bustling Caldwell home and Jacob's quiet cabin couldn't have been more stark. Here, every surface held evidence of family life. Children's toys, half-finished sewing projects, books and papers scattered about. The noise level never seemed to drop below a dull roar, with children arguing, laughing, or calling for their mother at all hours. Yet there was a warmth to the chaos that Delilah found herself drawn to. This was what a real family looked like, messy, loud, but bound together by genuine affection. It's always like this, 12-year-old Emma Caldwell confided as she helped Delilah settle into their shared room. Pa says we're louder than a cattle stampede. I think it's wonderful, Delilah said truthfully. The orphanage had been full of children too, but the atmosphere had been one of strict order and discipline, not this joyful disorder. Will you have lots of babies when you marry Mr. Armstrong? Emma asked with the directness of youth. Delilah felt her cheeks warm. We haven't discussed it yet. Ma says every ranch needs children to inherit it someday, and that Mr. Armstrong has been alone too long. Emma fingered Delilah's hairbrush with undisguised curiosity. Is it true you came all the way from Chicago on the train by yourself? Yes, it is. Weren't you scared? Pa won't even let me ride to town alone, and that's just 10 miles. Sometimes we have to be brave even when we're frightened, Delilah said, gently reclaiming her brush. Now, shall we go help your mother with supper? Life with the Caldwells quickly fell into a routine. Delilah helped Sarah with household tasks and minding the younger children. In return, Sarah taught her the particulars of frontier living, how to manage a garden in Montana's short growing season, preserve meat without an icebox, identify edible wild plants, and 100 other skills not covered in orphanage lessons. You're a quick study, Sarah observed as Delilah successfully negotiated with a traveling peddler for fabric to make curtains. Most city women take months to adjust. I've always been adaptable, Delilah replied. And I want to be prepared for married life. Sarah smiled knowingly. Jacob's been by every day this week. I'd say he's smitten. It was true. Despite the distance between their homes, Jacob had found reasons to visit daily. Sometimes he brought small gifts, wildflowers, a book from his shelf he thought she might enjoy, once even a length of blue ribbon he'd purchased in town. They would sit on the Caldwell's porch under Sarah's watchful eye, talking about their pasts, their hopes for the ranch, discovering the person behind the letters they'd exchanged. He's different than I expected, Delilah admitted. Better or worse? Different. His letters were so practical, almost cold. But in person She struggled to find the right words. There's a depth to him I didn't anticipate. Sarah nodded. Jacob keeps his feelings close. Always has. But they run deep. 2 weeks into her stay, Jacob arrived with Thunder and another horse, a gentle chestnut mare with a white star on her forehead. This is Penny, he said, helping Delilah into the saddle. Thought you might like to see more of the territory than the Caldwell's front porch. With Sarah's blessing and Thomas riding along as chaperone, they set out across the rolling hills. Jacob showed her the boundaries of his land, the creek where he'd built a small dam to create a swimming hole, the ridge where wildflowers carpeted the ground in brilliant purple and gold. It's beautiful, Delilah said as they paused to rest the horses. I never imagined Montana would be so vibrant. Wait until summer, Jacob said. The whole valley turns green as emeralds. Thomas had ridden ahead, giving them a semblance of privacy while remaining in sight. Delilah appreciated the gesture. These moments alone with Jacob were precious as they navigated the transition from strangers to spouses. The wedding's in 4 days, Jacob said, his voice carefully neutral. Are you still certain about this? Delilah looked at him, surprised by the question. Are you having doubts? No, he said quickly. But I want to be sure you aren't. It's not too late to change your mind, Delilah. I'd understand. She considered his words. Was she certain? The past 2 weeks had shown her more of Jacob Armstrong than months of letters ever could. She'd seen his gentleness with children, his patience with Hector's teasing, his fierce protection of his land and animals. She'd also seen his stubborn streak, his occasional dark moods, his discomfort with expressing emotions directly. I'm certain, she said finally. Are you? Jacob's eyes held hers. More certain than I've been about anything in a long time. The quiet intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. In that moment, Delilah understood that what had begun as a practical arrangement had evolved into something deeper, at least for her. She cared for this quiet, complex man, perhaps even more than cared. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it filled her with a strange calm. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Good, she said softly. Then we're in agreement. Jacob reached across the space between their horses and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. For more days, he said. For more days, she echoed. And for the first time, the prospect of becoming Mrs. Armstrong filled her not just with practical satisfaction, but with genuine anticipation. The day before the wedding brought clear skies and a flurry of activity at the Caldwell home. Sarah enlisted the help of neighboring women to prepare food for the celebration, while Thomas and his oldest son constructed rough tables and benches in the yard for the feast that would follow the ceremony. Delilah found herself surrounded by women she'd never met, all eager to meet Jacob Armstrong's mail-order bride and offer advice, some welcome, some mortifying, about married life. Never let him go to bed angry, counseled Mrs. Anderson, kneading bread dough with practiced hands. Always keep a bit of money hidden away for emergencies, whispered elderly Mrs. Sutton. Men don't understand women's necessities. The first night can be frightening, but a good man will be patient, Sarah murmured when the others were distracted, squeezing Delilah's hand reassuringly. Jacob is a good man. By mid-afternoon, Delilah escaped to the quiet of the bedroom, overwhelmed by the constant company and increasingly nervous about the next day's events. She was arranging her few possessions when a soft knock came at the door. Delilah? Jacob's here to see you, Emma called. She found him on the porch, hat in hand, looking as uncomfortable as she'd ever seen him. The yard was full of people preparing for tomorrow's celebration, but no one seemed to be paying them any attention. Walk with me, he asked. With a nod to Sarah, who was supervising the arrangement of tables, Delilah fell into step beside Jacob. They strolled toward the small orchard that bordered the Caldwell property, far enough for privacy, but still within sight of the house. Is everything all right? Delilah asked, concerned by his serious expression. Yes. No. I don't know. Jacob ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his agitation. I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow. About expectations. Oh. Delilah felt heat rise to her cheeks. Was he referring to what would happen after the ceremony? Their wedding night. Not that, he said quickly, correctly reading her embarrassment. Though we can discuss that too if you wish. Perhaps another time, she managed, relieved and disappointed in equal measure. Jacob nodded. What I meant was our marriage. What you expect from it. From me. The question caught her off guard. I thought we'd already established that. A partnership. A home. Perhaps children someday. Yes, but... He struggled visibly with his words. These past weeks, getting to know you, it's changed things for me. Delilah's heart began to beat faster. Changed how? Jacob stopped walking, turning to face her directly. When I wrote that advertisement, I wanted a practical arrangement. A woman who could help with the ranch, keep house, maybe bear children. I wasn't looking for feelings. The word hung in the air between them, fraught with meaning. And now, Delilah prompted softly when he didn't continue. Now I find myself hoping for more than just a practical arrangement. His eyes held hers, more vulnerable than she'd ever seen them. I want a real marriage, Delilah. Not just in name, but in heart. I want to be a husband you can be proud of, not just a provider. The simple honesty of his declaration moved her deeply. Jacob, you don't have to say anything now, he rushed on. I just wanted you to know before tomorrow. If that changes your mind about marrying me, I'll understand. Delilah shook her head, smiling through sudden tears. It doesn't change my mind. Quite the opposite. What do you mean? I mean, I've been feeling the same way. What started as a practical decision has become something else. She took a deep breath. I care for you, Jacob. More than I expected to. More than I thought possible in such a short time. The tension in his shoulders eased visibly. Really, really. She reached for his hand, twining her fingers with his. So yes, I want a real marriage too. In every sense. Jacob's smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and worry. With their joined hands, he drew her closer, stopping just short of an embrace. I wish I could kiss you right now, he said, his voice low. Delilah glanced toward the house. No one was looking their way. Who's to stop you? For a moment, Jacob hesitated. Then, with a decisiveness that made her heart race, he bent his head and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, almost tentative at first, then deeper as she responded. His free hand came up to cradle her face, rough fingers surprisingly tender against her skin. When they broke apart, both slightly breathless, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. One more day, he whispered. One more day, she agreed, her heart too full for more words. A shout from the direction of the house broke the moment. Thomas was waving, pointing to a rider approaching in the distance. That's Hector, Jacob said, reluctantly releasing her. He was supposed to meet me here. We're moving the last of your things to the ranch today. The reminder of their impending cohabitation sent a flutter of nervous excitement through Delilah. Tomorrow night, she would return to Jacob's cabin, their cabin, as his wife in every sense. I should get back, she said. Sarah needs help with the wedding preparations. Jacob nodded, but made no move to leave. Delilah? Yes. Thank you. For what? His smile was tender, transforming his usually serious face. For arriving early. It seems it really was perfect timing. As they walked back toward the house hand in hand, Delilah couldn't help but agree. The twist of fate that had brought her to Montana 3 weeks ahead of schedule had given them the gift of truly knowing each other before their wedding. Not just as practical partners, but as a man and woman falling in love. Perfect timing indeed. Asterisk, 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 wedding day dawned clear and cool, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wild sage. Delilah woke early, her stomach fluttering with a mixture of excitement and nerves. Today she would become Mrs. Jacob Armstrong, no longer an orphan, no longer alone, but a wife with a home and a future of her own making. Sarah bustled in with a breakfast tray and shooed her daughters out of the room. "Can't have the bride fainting from hunger at her own wedding," she declared, setting down plates of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread. "Eat, then we'll get you ready." Delilah tried to obey, but her appetite had deserted her. "I'm not sure I can," she admitted. Sarah sat beside her on the bed. "Wedding nerves are normal, dear. I threw up twice before marrying Thomas." The frank admission startled a laugh from Delilah. "That's not very reassuring. But I haven't regretted a day since," Sarah continued. "Well, perhaps a few days when he was being particularly stubborn. But that's marriage, the good and the bad together, making a life that belongs to both of you." Delilah nodded, finding comfort in Sarah's practical wisdom. "I'm ready for that. For all of it." "I believe you are," Sarah said, patting her hand. "Now eat something. We've got a busy morning ahead." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Sarah helped Delilah bathe and wash her hair, then dress in her best gown. A simple blue dress with white lace at the collar and cuffs. It wasn't a proper wedding gown, but Delilah had kept it carefully preserved for special occasions. "Something new," Sarah said, handing her a small package. Inside was a delicate handkerchief embroidered with DA for Delilah Armstrong. "I worked on it while you were asleep." Tears sprang to Delilah's eyes. "It's beautiful." "Thank you." "Something borrowed," Emma announced, carefully placing her mother's pearl hairpins in Delilah's dark waves. "Ma wore these when she married Pa. And something blue is taken care of by your lovely dress," Sarah concluded. "Now we just need something old." Delilah touched the cameo at her throat. "My mother's necklace. She wore it at her own wedding." Sarah smiled approvingly. "Perfect. Now you're ready to become a bride." By noon, guests had begun to arrive at the Caldwell homestead. It seemed the entire community had turned out for the occasion, ranchers from miles around, the shopkeeper from town and his wife, even the mayor and his family. Delilah watched through the window as Jacob arrived with Hector, both men cleaned up and wearing their Sunday best. Jacob looked uncommonly handsome in a dark coat, his hair neatly combed, his beard trimmed close. The sight of him made her heart skip. A commotion at the front of the house announced the arrival of Reverend Tilson, a portly man with a booming voice who greeted everyone with evangelical enthusiasm. "It's time," Sarah said, adjusting Delilah's collar one last time. "Ready?" Delilah took a deep breath. "Ready." The ceremony took place in the Caldwell's front yard, beneath an arch Thomas and the boys had constructed from saplings and decorated with wildflowers. As tradition dictated, Delilah remained inside until the last moment. Through the window, she could see Jacob standing beside the Reverend, his tall frame straight and proud, his hands clasped before him. Thomas appeared at her side. "Since your father isn't here to do the honors, I'd be privileged to escort you, if you'll allow it." Delilah blinked back tears at the kind gesture. "I would be honored, Mr. Caldwell." With Thomas's steady arm supporting her, Delilah stepped onto the porch. A murmur went through the assembled guests as they turned to look at her. But Delilah had eyes only for Jacob, whose expression as he saw her made the weeks of uncertainty, the grueling journey west, and every moment of doubt worth enduring. The walk to the arch seemed both eternal and instantaneous. Then Thomas was placing her hand in Jacob's, and the Reverend was beginning the ceremony. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Tilson intoned, his voice carrying across the yard. "We are gathered here today to witness the union of Jacob Armstrong and Delilah Rose in holy matrimony." The familiar words washed over Delilah as she stood beside Jacob, their hands joined. His palm was warm and steady against hers, anchoring her as the Reverend spoke of commitment, partnership, and love's enduring power. When the time came for vows, Jacob's voice rang clear and sure. "I, Jacob, take thee, Delilah, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Delilah's own voice trembled slightly as she repeated the sacred promises, but her conviction was absolute. This man, this place, this life, this was what she had chosen, and she embraced it wholeheartedly. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Tilson concluded, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Jacob's hands were gentle as he lifted her face to his. His kiss was tender, respectful of their audience, yet conveying a promise of deeper affection to come. When they turned to face their guests, the cheers and applause seemed to echo across the Montana sky. "Mrs. Armstrong," Jacob whispered, the wonder in his voice matching what Delilah felt in her heart. The celebration that followed lasted well into the evening. There was food and drink in abundance, music provided by a fiddler from town, and dancing on a wooden platform Thomas and Jacob had constructed for the occasion. Delilah was passed from one well-wisher to another, receiving advice, congratulations, and welcomes to the community until her head spun with it all. Through it all, Jacob remained close, his hand often finding hers, his eyes seeking her out across the crowded yard. They were connected now, not just by vows and legal documents, but by a growing bond that transcended their practical arrangement. As twilight descended, Jacob found her by the punch bowl. "Ready to go home?" he asked quietly. Home. The word held new meaning now. "Yes," Delilah said simply. Their departure was accompanied by good-natured teasing and knowing looks. Sarah hugged Delilah tightly. "Remember what we talked about," she whispered. "And come visit soon. I want to hear all about married life." Jacob had the wagon waiting, decorated with ribbons and flowers by the Caldwell children. He helped Delilah up to the seat, then took the reins. As they pulled away from the Caldwell homestead, a cheer went up from the remaining guests. The 10-mile journey to their ranch passed mostly in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the day and what lay ahead. Darkness had fallen completely by the time they approached the cabin, but Delilah could make out its silhouette against the star-filled sky. Jacob reined in the horses and turned to her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Armstrong." Before Delilah could respond, he was out of the wagon and coming around to her side. Instead of simply helping her down, he lifted her into his arms in one fluid movement. "Jacob," she gasped, surprised by the traditional gesture. "Carrying my bride across the threshold," he explained, his voice husky in the darkness. "It's tradition." He carried her up the porch steps, and through the door he'd somehow managed to open without setting her down. Inside, Delilah was surprised to find the cabin warmly lit with oil lamps and a crackling fire in the hearth. Fresh flowers stood in a jar on the table, and the air smelled of pine and something sweet. "When did you do all this?" she asked as he set her gently on her feet. "Hector came ahead to get everything ready," Jacob admitted. "I wanted it to be welcoming for you." Delilah moved further into the room, noticing other changes since she'd last been here. Curtains hung at the windows, the ones she'd sewn at the Caldwells but hadn't had time to hang. The floor had been freshly swept, the furniture polished, and the door to what had been the storeroom stood open, revealing a transformed space. The narrow bed was now made up with fresh linens and a beautiful quilt. Curtains framed the window, and a small rug covered the plank floor beside the bed. A chest of drawers stood against one wall, and a mirror hung above it. It was simple but comfortable, a room prepared with care. "Do you like it?" Jacob asked, his uncertainty showing in his voice. Sarah helped with some of the touches. Said a woman needs her own space. Delilah turned to him, her heart full. "It's perfect." Relief washed over his features. "I wasn't sure. It's still not fancy like city homes." "I don't want fancy. I want a home. Our home." She stepped closer to him, emboldened by the day's events and the privacy they now shared. "Thank you for making it so lovely." Jacob reached for her hands, drawing her nearer. "I want you to be happy here, Delilah. With me." The vulnerability in his voice touched something deep within her. This strong, capable man who had carved a life from the wilderness was allowing her to see his fears, his hopes. "I am happy," she assured him. "Happier than I ever expected to be." His eyes searched hers, looking for confirmation of her words. Whatever he saw there must have reassured him, because the tension left his shoulders. "Good. That's good." They stood for a moment in the gentle lamplight, husband and wife at last, on the threshold of their shared life. The air between them hummed with unspoken possibilities. "Would you like some tea?" Jacob asked finally, releasing her hands. "Or are you tired from the day's excitement?" Delilah recognized the question for what it was, an opportunity to retreat if she needed time, space, to adjust to their new circumstances. But she had made her decision long before today's ceremony. "No tea," she said quietly. "But I am a bit overwhelmed by everything. Perhaps we could just sit by the fire for a while." Jacob nodded, leading her to the sofa near the hearth. They sat close, but not touching, the newness of their situation creating a delicate tension between them. It was a beautiful ceremony, Delilah said, watching the flames dance in the fireplace. Yes, though I barely remember the words. I was too busy looking at you. The simple admission warmed her more than the fire. I was nervous, she confessed. So was I, terrified actually. She glanced at him, surprised by his honesty. You didn't seem it. Years of poker with Hector taught me something about hiding my feelings, he said with a small smile. But my hands were shaking the whole time. Mine too. Delilah looked down at their hands now, steady and still. But not anymore. Jacob's eyes met hers, and the intensity she saw there made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned toward her. His kiss was different from the chaste one they'd shared during the ceremony. Deeper, more searching, a question and an answer all at once. Delilah's hands found their way to his shoulders, then his hair, as the kiss deepened. Jacob pulled her closer until she was nearly in his lap, his arms strong around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Jacob rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that properly since our talk in the orchard. Nothing was stopping you just now, Delilah said, surprising herself with her boldness. Jacob's laugh was low and warm. My wife is a woman of spirit. I should have known. Wife. The word sent a shiver of pleasure through her. Husband, she countered, testing the feel of it on her tongue. His expression grew serious again. Delilah, I want you to know, there's no rush for anything more tonight. We have all the time in the world now. She appreciated his consideration, but the events of the day, the weeks of growing closer, and the certainty of her feelings made her decision clear. Rising from the sofa, she held out her hand to him. I think we've waited long enough, don't you? She said softly. Jacob took her hand, his expression a mixture of desire and reverence that made her feel both powerful and cherished. As he led her toward their bedroom, not the small room he'd prepared for her, but his own larger one, Delilah felt the last of her nervousness fade, replaced by anticipation and a deep certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Outside, the Montana nights spread vast and star-filled above their small cabin. Inside, two people who had begun as strangers discovered the final transformation from arrangement to love, from solitude to partnership, from separate paths to a single shared journey. For Delilah Rose, now Armstrong, the unexpected early arrival that had seemed so troublesome had indeed proven to be perfect timing. Not just for practical reasons, but because it had given her the chance to discover what she'd never dared hope for. A love as vast as the Montana sky, as solid as the mountains on the horizon, and as promising as the dawn that would greet them as husband and wife.